All right, I did share the notes again. If you have any topics, please feel free to add them. Should I go ahead and drive, or does someone else want to take the opportunity today? Alrighty. So yeah, if you don't mind, just add yourself as a participant. If there's anyone that would like to introduce themselves, please, yeah, use a little emoji and go ahead and say hi to everyone. Just give a sec here.
You guys hear me okay?
Yep, I hear two people.
You go first,
Sorry.
please.
Okay. Drew?
Hello, everybody. This is my, I think, third or fourth meeting that I'm joining. I'm happy to be here. I am head of developer relations for Unleash, also an open source feature flagging service. And we are getting more active, and we'll be having a presentation from one of our team members today talking about something that we've developed that might be mutually beneficial to all of us. Or at least that's what our hope. We think there's at least some potential there, but also just happy to be here participating, helping move things forward in an open sourcey fashion. So good to be here. Good to see y'all. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Drew. Federico?
Hi, I'm Fede. I'm an independent software developer from Argentina, and I've been contributing recently to the Python SDKs. And I wanted to present today and have an opportunity to discuss my recent semantic conventions proposal.
Perfect. Cool. Yeah, welcome. Morno?
Oh, hello. My name is Moreno. I'm the head of solution architects on Flagsmith. I'm based in Brazil, and before I was with Flagsmith, I worked for PlanetScale and ScyllaDB. So I went from databases to front-end feature flags. It's all new to me. I'm hoping to learn a lot from all of you.
Awesome. Perfect. Welcome. Sorry about mispronouncing your name too.
Don't worry.
All right. Real quick, yeah. Last thing, I'll just post it one more time, and then I can just hand it off to the Unleash team. Looks like they're up first.
We have one more person waiting to
to shoot. Sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, that's all right. Hey, everyone. My name is Frederick. I'm principal and engineer with Unleash. I've been working on feature flagging for the past 2.5 years, and very interested to see what happens in this direction and how this space develops. So happy to be here, and nice to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Welcome.
I apologize. I was actually I was muted earlier. I had my hardware mute on and didn't realize it. But I was just saying I'll go ahead and be scribe, since this is one of the few occasions that I don't have any meeting agenda items.
You did say that, but that's all right. Twice is a good reminder, I guess. Alrighty. I think Simon was going to go ahead and present from the Unleash team, if that's correct.
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. All right.
Steal the screen then.
Hey Simon, your audio is a little bit quiet. I'm not sure if there's anything.
Sorry, give me 1 second to sort that out. Is that better?
No.
It's about the same. I can hear you okay. It's a little quiet.
Yeah, it's not terrible, but there's a volume button there.
I've cranked it up as much as volume as I can get.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll make it work.
Let's see how it goes. If it's terrible, then just give me a shout, guys. So let me go ahead and grab the screen quick. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, hi. If everyone doesn't know who I am, I'm Simon. So I'm one of the senior engineers at Unleash. And I'm here to talk about our project Yggdrasil that we've been working on for about 1.5 to 2 years, I think. So this was never designed to be something to solve what we are solving here, but there's so much overlap that I think it's probably worth mentioning. So before we dive into the solution space, I just want to kind of contextualize the problem that we were facing and why we attempted to address this in the first place. So if you look at the overarching view of our life at Unleash, we have the Unleash server sitting at the central place, and we have 8 of these SDKs that kind of hang off the side. And at the moment, each one of these SDKs contains a bunch of really complicated logic that interprets feature toggles. And I suspect we're not alone here. I suspect anyone who's building feature toggle providers kind of has the same place where you end up rewriting the same logic a million times. And this kind of sucks. It's hard to update. It's fragile. It breaks a lot. To get consistency between all of our SDKs is an ongoing pain. And then it's not all that flexible. So sitting around these blobs of JSON is very difficult to interpret from a human readable perspective. So we've had a strong feeling for a very long time that we've been able to do something better. So we took a stab. If you look at the anatomy of how an SDK is constructed, effectively you've got these language-specific constructs that hang on the one side, caching, HTTP, concurrency primitives, things like that. But the stuff that's really interesting to us is how you calculate the state of a toggle. That stuff we believe can and should be shared. So turning a blob of logic from your server into a true or a false or a variant or something like that, we believe that logic can be standardized across all the SDKs and can be improved. So that's effectively what we have set out to do. So we built a centralized Rust engine, and we've wrapped that using a technique called foreign function interfaces into all of the languages that we've used. I've shown 4 here, but in practice we're doing 8. This kind of contextualizes the problem. This is what we wanted to solve. But when we start dipping into what it means for OpenFeature, we've also started to explore the idea of using a domain-specific language for feature toggles. And the idea here is rather than sending this huge blob of complicated JSON down, you can actually send something like that looks a lot more like a human-readable term. And I've stolen one of the tests directly out of Yggdrasil here, and you can kind of see this is actually expressing what a feature toggle looks like. So this is our gradual rollout strategy, expressed as a DSL here, and then plus one of our constraints. And you can see this code is relatively simple. So you just take your rule directly out of here, you compile it, and then you can trigger this as enabled function. And this is kind of like where we would like to go. This is looking a lot more like the wired protocol stuff that I think we discussed last week, just expressing your rules as a DSL. So how this works in practice, this is actually quite a complicated process. Right now in Unleash sends this really large blob of JSON down, and I've given you a little example on the side. You can see it's a pretty complicated blob. This gets upgraded by Yggdrasil into its internal DSL format. So you can see this is a lot more human readable. This kind of gives you a sense of what's going on. Sorry, I heard someone about to ask a question. No, okay. So this is a more human readable format. It's much lighter, and this can be interpreted by the Yggdrasil engine in any language that we want at this moment. So this is lighter and cleaner. So we are using a parser generator called PEST to turn this DSL into an executable function. So I've given you guys here a pseudo JavaScript, a look at what this looks like. Practically behind the scenes, this is all Rust. But then once you've generated this function like this, you can just execute it at will, which is really nice. So this is kind of where we would like to go with Yggdrasil. Ultimately, long term, we're basically looking at implementing a wire protocol ourselves, and we've been working on this for a long time. So I've given you guys a sense of what the JSON formats looks like long term, what we want to do. You see the is enabled here is literally just an expression. User ID is greater than 7. This would represent a feature toggle with a single constraint. So to kind of give you guys a sense, this is already running in production. This has been running in production for nearly a year, a long time. Runs in our relay or proxy server, if you're familiar with the term. And it's pretty fast. So we measure the execution of a feature toggle in nanoseconds. It's about 100 nanoseconds to execute a relatively complicated feature toggle. This is very early, to give you guys a sense. This is not running in any of our SDKs outside of our proxy server, but on the right-hand side, I've given you a diff there. We've got a draft pull request to pull this into our Ruby SDK. Ruby SDK is about 5,000 lines of code. So this is half of that code gone. So this is lighter, faster, and easier to work with. But it's not perfect. This is very much entwined in Unleash's domain logic at the moment, and there's still a lot of work to do to pull it into our SDKs. But we do believe this is kind of where we want to go in the future, and we think this dovetails a lot with what we are discussing. That was a very, very quick crash course. So I'm going to pause it there, and if anyone wants to ask questions.
I have a quick question. So I feel like a lot of providers probably consider a similar thing, whether it's somehow outsourcing the logic to a single source of truth. Whether it's, I've even in talking to companies that are implementing this internally, like at Coinbase, they were considering doing Q and like shelling out to Q, or having something along those lines. However, statically linking to some C binary, which is, I think, very similar to Yggdrasil, right?
Yeah.
But two things always get in the way, right? One is FFI and like static linking from other languages doesn't always work, right? Like in Go, it's really ugly. And like, for example, I was trying to find the C Go. I was like looking for C Go in here because I don't think there's a way to like do this well in Go, for example. And like I could think of a couple other languages, right? So I'm interested I'm sure those trade-offs were taken into account by your team. I'm interested like where you see the interoperability work amongst languages where this is like not the cleanest thing in the world.
I just wanted to chime in. We've been doing something very similar at DevCycle. We're using WebAssembly and ran into all the Go things you just mentioned, and then ended up. So we use WebAssembly for basically all of our SDKs outside of Go, where we just had a lot of performance issues getting it to work well with Go, and ended up writing a native Go version. But we basically have a WebAssembly core that we use across our servers, our relay proxy, our server-side SDKs, and then we have a Go implementation as well. But so we have a similar structure.
It's a great question, and I was desperately hoping no one would mention Go because it's been the biggest pain. It is a challenge with Go. There are ways that you can build a statically linked binary. I'm exploring it. Of the 7 other languages, all of the others work smoothly. It's just Go that's a huge pain. I think there are solutions that we can get working. I have some proof of concepts that are working smoothly, but yes, Go is a risk. Specifically, Golang is a risk.
How does it work for if you wanted to do like evaluation on the client in a browser? Do you have to like compile it to JavaScript and then ship the JavaScript at runtime, or?
Yeah, so I kind of dodged that a little bit in this conversation. The JavaScript version does compile down to WASM, and we use that.
Okay.
Mostly just because it is a clean and easy option. It's very easy to build an FFI option for JavaScript, but since we have WASM and it runs in a browser, why not?
Yeah.
Quick question about the kind of the DSL you've come up with. Is there any like known limitations at the moment, or does it cover like all, I guess, the common use cases for or patterns that you've run into so far?
So that's another great question. That's probably more the heart of, I think, what we're here to discuss. That DSL covers all of the unleashed domain logic at the moment. So there's nothing that we missed in that. The risk here is I don't know whether it will work for anyone else in this call. So that would be the exploration. Can everyone else express their toggles as a DSL? I don't know. That's what I'd love to find out. But yeah, certainly this has been running in production. We haven't had any problems with it. It does all of Unleash.
Nice. And then you're already parsing that too. It looked like according to that one page. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Sorry, cut you off, Todd. Go ahead.
No problem. When we kind of were introduced to this topic, I was wondering exactly where it would fall between, the flag definition versus the wire protocol. If I'm understanding correctly, though, at least what you've described so far is I would say more towards like a standardized definition, like that's kind of what the DSL is. When we talked about wire protocol before, I think there's been some confusion here generally, where I think we're mostly referring to a system that accepts a request for a flag evaluation, taking in user context as one of its parameters, does some evaluation and returns a result. Whereas what you're talking about is more or less shipping a rules engine itself to a process and having that rules engine run in process. I just want to make sure that I'm not totally confused or off base. And
no, you're completely spot on. And this is probably where we need to start talking about what it means to be a flag evaluation language. The way we would understand this is Yggdrasil would run in our proxy server Unleash, and that would provide a standardized format for the evaluation results of the flag language.
So the evaluation would still happen in the proxy server, and this would just be a way of
well, that's how it works for them right now. But I think the proposal would be you could theoretically use this to embed it in process. And right, like this would be a common evaluation engine in process, is assuming you're using this, flag definition.
Yeah. So you can do both. We are working towards having this buried in our SDKs and having the engine nested in that. Then you send the entire blob down, and the engine can work without making any HTTP calls. The alternative is to use this through our edge server, in which case you do have an HTTP overhead between the two. So there's flexibility between the two.
If I may add, it's based on the Unleash logic, and that's how our SDK has always worked, is that we send the configuration down to the SDKs, and we do the evaluation locally so that none of the application context leaves the application of the user. So we don't accept any of the contextual data back into the Unleash server, because all of it happens in the process, in the application that's running on the server for the user.
So can you pull up the diagram you had, Simon, with the different steps? So there's that, it's like the top of that kind of flow, that pipeline, there was some JSON, and then it gets converted from JSON.
I actually want to chime in there, because obviously we have our current format in Unleash.
You got it.
But we decided so for this, Yggdrasil is, for us, this is bigger. This could potentially be an open source project in its own, but we needed to convert our current format into the DSL. So that's what we're doing now. So we are converting our own internal format to the DSL, and then using that.
So I mean, that's similar to even the proposal we had, where you could kind of do like transpiling of existing flag definitions.
Exactly.
Like this.
Exactly. That's how we think about this. So obviously, instead of redesigning everything on the Unleash side first, let's prove out this concept inside of our relay proxy, or what we call the edge. And if we can prove that we can do this, obviously, then at some point we can introduce these formats natively into Unleash. And the huge benefit that we see is that obviously working with some of the larger users of Unleash, they may have upwards to 10, 20,000 toggles. And obviously the JSON payload can be quite huge. And moving this into a more expressive, human readable DSL allows us to be very spot on what you want to do with feature flagging without having a very verbose kind of JSON structure around this. We did look into all this JSON logic and other kind of off-the-shelf solution that already exists across many languages, but it ended up being too verbose. It wouldn't be, the JSON blob itself would just be too big for us.
So the proposal is the DSL would be the kind of like the standardize on the DSL and
exactly. We have no intention of, like, the internal Unleash format is the internal Unleash format, of course.
Yeah. And then that third part where you're kind of transpiling the DSL into a function, where is that done, like once for all the platforms? Or is it like each, like if I'm, JavaScript versus whatever, something else?
Yes, I think eventually, obviously, our API would deliver the DSL directly. That's what we kind of look as the long-term vision for us. But instead of starting there, let's start with something that we can prove out, because obviously the biggest question for us can we have parity on feature? Can we actually pull this off? Will this work in practice? So now we are looking into the actual SDKs. The one we have gotten the furthest with is the Ruby SDK. And our plan is to introduce this behind the scenes and obviously validate this quite heavily before we roll it out to customers. But that's kind of our process. And as soon as we have confidence on that, at some point, we will transition, obviously, to the DSL on the API side. But I believe, and where does the translator live? I don't know. And maybe this is also something that will happen gradually if more vendors were to kind of align on this. And if it's just us, of course, then we would do pragmatic choices on our own behalf. But kind of our goal here is like we we see value in collaborating on the standard. We also see that this is not something that we don't expect vendors to jump over to this tomorrow. This is a long-term thing for everyone. This is even for us a long-term thing because the stakes are just too high. Like people are using it in production. We cannot just break stuff.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. So, when it's interesting that you have is the parsing and lexing done in Yggdrasil once you get the okay, so I feel like that's an interesting choice, not to, because I saw Cell, like when we look at Cell, right? I don't know if y'all considered it for this, but the whole idea of Cell is like you take the expression language, you compile it to this like intermediate form basically, and then you evaluate the intermediate form with, or this intermediate binary format with the context. So the idea is like you perform the parsing and lexing beforehand into the Cell DSL essentially, or Cell, you know, it's a proto format, but like Cell proto format, machine readable format. And then you use, that's what you ship everywhere. So I'm a proto fanboy, so I'm always pushing Cell everywhere, but like, I do wonder if something like Cell, which does have DSL plugins, it's not the cleanest thing in the world, but sorry, my laptop just turned to light mode. It might have lagged. But I think it's like an interesting, yeah, I just wonder if there are a lot of trade-offs here. I'm sure y'all considered a lot of them. But I think when it comes to standardization, right, like every time we pick a new DSL for expressions, like it's the XKCD comes again, right? So I don't know, just some thoughts that popped into my head, but I think this is really cool either way. Like the fact that you guys have figured out in 7 languages, almost Go is very cool. So
almost Go. So I don't know about Cell. That's a new and interesting thing. I would love a link to that. In terms of trade-offs, they felt quite light. So the compile phase is pretty fast. We measure that in, I think it's microseconds, even for large responses. So I got to the point where I was like, it's fast enough, it works well enough, it's robust enough, it's good for our use case. I'm not going to poke it anymore. And I moved on. But if there's interesting stuff around Cell, man, I always want to read more things.
I think there's an inherent advantage in a human readable format that is, you know, a specific DSL to feature flags. Because like, I mean, if you were to develop a language standard, it would be nice for these SDKs. Like that's great. But like, if you're a cloud vendor and you can, you know, or you're even the Kubernetes project and you create CRDs that basically represent these, that makes this DSL a first-class citizen in any of these vendors, you basically have a basis for defining interoperable feature flags in multiple platforms, assuming that multiple platforms would support the DSL. So I think there is an inherent advantage in having a human readable feature flag DSL, whether or not it's the thing that's actually evaluated or some corresponding, you know, machine readable code is evaluated.
I hear you, Todd, but like I feel like evaluation is like logic is like a solved thing. I don't know, logic with like plugins, right? As opposed to like, I feel like it isn't feature flag specific, but that's just my thought. Like logical evaluation does seem pretty generalizable.
Do you mean like building the runtime or like building or like defining the DSL?
The DSL itself.
There are some constructs that are maybe not specific, but at least in kind of the hashing algorithm. How do you normalize that? How do you make it sticky? And obviously you can probably extend or kind of build on something that exists, but at least what we learned from that, it ends up being very verbose and strange.
Yeah. I think if you want to get to the point of a like a product manager writing in this language, like it is a domain, like it is a domain that you want to like make a nice language for. Otherwise, you just say like, oh, just write it in JSON logic. It's easy, right? Like,
yeah, I can attest to somebody who's written like the random bucketing algorithms in JSON logic. It's non-trivial, right? It's that kind of thing is domain specific. Agreed.
I would say though that like the evaluating, like the what Conrad described as the idea of like having a runtime where you can kind of compile some DSL into some intermediary format and then just make it someone else's problem to make that intermediary format run on a bunch of different platforms performantly. That sounds lovely. But I'm not like I'm pretty I don't know, paranoid that there isn't actually something out there that would actually work on all the platforms that we would need it to. And I wonder if we'd end up just doing something in WASM or something like that. But I personally don't think it's a great idea to invest a ton of engineering time in building yet another like runtime evaluation like frameworky thing that supports all the different languages out there. It would be a really fun engineering project, which is why I think so many people build them. But
one thing I wanted to point out that is interesting for DCL that is specific to feature flags, it lets you express very succinctly certain kinds of rules that for a more generic kind of logic engine, it would be a lot harder, like the sticky stuff and stuff like that. And I think it actually makes sense at the DSL level. I don't know the runtime evaluation of that, but at least at the DSL level, it's I think compared to the proposal that were discussed before that revolved around generic rules engines, I think this is very interesting because I don't know how I would express some of these conditions in a generic rule engine. Sometimes you would have to like use custom variables that have special meaning and stuff like that, and it wouldn't be as human readable as this alternative.
So I can second that as the person who worked on this. Having the DSL and the AST allowed me to abstract a whole bunch of concepts away, which was great. So things like gradual rollout 100% can just be expressed as 100% rather than dipping into the logic of what that actually means. So you do get things like user ID greater than 7, which would be expressed in any construct the same way. But there are very, very specific things that I think are completely related to feature toggles. And having those expressed as a DSL allows you just to make it your problem and not your user's problem, which is nice.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I really like the presentation today. I think it's super cool, really interesting stuff, and I really think it's cool to understand how you're basically working with your existing flag definition and then transpiling it. I think that's an interesting takeaway. It's something that we could maybe do as maybe a next step is one, look at what your DSL looks like and make sure that there's nothing too outlandish out there. I wouldn't expect it based on the screenshots and stuff, but it looks quite comprehensive from what I can tell. But then seeing how we could maybe take existing flag definitions and convert them into this, and maybe it does become very obvious that it is easy to do, or there's some missing pieces, and then I think we could talk and see what we'd like to do as maybe a next step.
There will definitely be missing pieces. So we use specific hashing algorithms, which I'm not convinced everybody else is using, and those are kind of baked into the engine's interpreter. So there will be gaps. I can absolutely guarantee there will be gaps, but there might be easy gaps to close, and I think we should explore that.
Yep, sounds good. Perfect. All right. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add on that section? I really appreciate the time. It was really cool. Nice work.
Just one quick last question. When you were kind of like when you all Unleashed were evaluating this, did you do any research that we could kind of leverage of kind of existing like prior art, like other kind of like open source feature flag DSLs or anything like that? Because it would be good also just to look at what else is out there. I'm not really aware of much, to be honest.
So I did some surveying of the literature. I didn't find very much. And I think I eventually figured that either other people weren't doing this or it was a terrible idea for some reason. So I just set out to explore it. And when it started to work, I haven't found anything else. The only other approach I've seen is the JSON logic approach.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess just everyone on the call, if you're interested, take a look at this, and I would definitely look at like, Simon, do you have like the DSL like written out somewhere? Like I looked through the wiki page and I saw a little bit or not the wiki, just the GitHub page. But I didn't see a whole lot of like examples of the DSL. So that might be something that if you have that, if you could link it somewhere, I'd definitely like to take a look at.
Kinda don't, to be entirely honest. This kind of went from a toy project to incredibly important in a very short space of time, and I've neglected the docs. But the easiest way to get a sense of how the DSL works, which I can link, is the test cases, which are pretty extensive. Let me just grab them and I can put them here. And then I have some documentation that's sitting on my machine that I desperately need to push. I apologize.
And we should also share the presentation, Simon. And also kind of our process here. This has been an experiment on our end, and we on purpose didn't want to tell the world because we didn't. Again, we are an open source company. It's not that we hide stuff. It's been transparent if you look at our issues and all of that. But we didn't want to go announce it to the world before we saw that we could actually added value. It's because we always want to keep our options open, of course.
But just to be clear, the plan is right now, like it does seem to be adding value, and the plan is to
Yeah,
start integrating
so our plan is to integrate this into the many SDKs as we can. We will obviously be very careful monitoring performance. That is super important to us, and then the type of users that use Unleash in production. And our challenges on our side, of course. Sorry for the background noise, but that's our plan. We have enough evidence. We are running it in production for large installations, and we see it's working. It's giving us the results that we are looking for. So now we have started looking into Ruby SDK. We have already compiled it with many languages, but we are kind of Ruby SDK is the first kind of that we are the closest on moving to the next phase. But then again, this is not something we do for short term. This is for ourselves to do long term, to make sure, and again, making sure our protocol is consistent across programming languages and that we can evolve the protocol over time. So that's kind of the long term goal for us. If we can collaborate with more people, fantastic. Again, I don't believe the DSL and the evaluator itself is what's going to set us apart from the other vendors. I think it can be flexible enough, and at some point even there is an opportunity to move that either into the OpenFeature initiative or as a separate project. We don't know that yet, but then again, we don't want to do that if it's only us doing all the grunt work. Then it's an Unleash project, of course. So it's more like we have it, it's an idea. We are now starting to invest more documentation, more kind of making more people aware of it, starting to promote it and see where it lands. If it only lands to solve our own needs, that's fine too, because we have huge needs. We want to support as many programming languages as possible in the most efficient way.
Yeah, makes sense. Perfect. Thanks. Alrighty, yeah. If there's nothing else, I guess we can move on to the next topic. Yeah, appreciate it though, guys. It was really interesting.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, moving on to the semantic convention.
Okay, so this is a topic that I think has been discussed before when the evaluation context was first introduced. After last week's meeting, when we discussed the flag definition language and the evaluation wire protocol, it got me thinking that both of these initiatives would benefit from some standard definitions about the attributes for the evaluation context for common use cases. In particular, I thought about two use cases. We discussed at some point the possibility that a third-party tool, a tool that is designed to run on premises and wants to use feature flag service, can connect to whatever whatever backend or vendor is on the other side through a common word protocol. And the thing is, this tool is going to have to define some attributes about the subject in many cases, and whatever definition it uses it's going to restrict the range of compatibility with whatever vendor understands those attributes. So it's a bit of it's one remaining source of lock-in in the OpenFeature ecosystem, and you know there is no avoiding that. They must choose some keys, and this happens also within different teams in the same organization. Let's say Team A is working on a certain service, and maybe they use a vendor, and Team B is working on another service and they use a different vendor. So they encode their context differently. Maybe they want to eventually migrate to a common vendor or not. But the thing that is going to happen is that maybe an engineer working on one of these services needs to work temporarily on the other service, and they want to write a flag definition for it, and it's very easy to get confused. And maybe if service A uses user.email and you want to write a rule matching that, and then service B uses just email, then there's nothing that is going to prevent you from writing a definition that doesn't actually segment for the user that you want to segment. So the idea is not to use these semantic conventions as a sort of prescriptive rules of what should be there. It's more like a sort of coordination point, so that you can avoid bike shedding for common use cases, and teams can agree on use a standard set of keys and roughly have a common understanding of what they mean. And now if you use a certain vendor that offers advanced functionality, or that has an SDK that includes a whole bunch of information about the platform or the device, and that's perfectly fine. I know there has been some feedback on Slack from Ryan, I think, from Launch Darkly, where they use multiple contexts, and I think that that is perfectly fine if a vendor doesn't want to use the semantic conventions, or if the organization thinks that another kind of schema would better fit their needs, like Elastic Common Schema, because maybe their engineers are already used to that, then it's perfectly fine to use that schema. This would be sort of just a minimalistic coordination point for many teams to choose and to settle on a common standard for that works for many common use cases. And then on top of that, they can add whatever application specific or domain specific context keys is valuable for their business. So the objective is that is more along the lines of, if you're going to encode this piece of information and you're not really sure how you should encode it, then here is a guideline that may be helpful, but it's not about being prescriptive. One thing I also wanted to point out is that the semantic conventions was inspired by OpenTelemetry, but they don't really semantic conventions in OpenFeature do not really occupy this same specific space that they do on OpenFeature and OpenTelemetry. Basically, because in OpenTelemetry, the data is about the past, so you really want to include a lot of things, because you don't really know when you're going to investigate an issue in production, what kind of keys you're going to find useful to pinpoint the root cause of that issue. Whereas data for OpenFeature is more about the present and the future. So whatever context is missing, if you have a well-architected system, you're just half an hour away from a deploy and including that piece of context if you want to segment on that. So I would encourage teams to just include whatever is necessary for the use case, but use the semantic conventions as a sort of guideline. If I want to include this piece of information, here is some way that can work and that can be reasonably standardized across the whole organization, which can be very useful whenever you're working on different services or you're planning on a common migration, and maybe eventually in the future you want to migrate to some common vendor or some common service, and that would allow you to reuse whatever rules or whatever rules were expressed in a certain DSL or in JSON or whatever. So that's sort of the proposal, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it.
I have two thoughts, high level. I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting proposal, and I think it could be very valuable. I think one thing also is PII. It helps to be able to identify what fields might constitute PII, and I think this could just be helpful there, even if it's not used rigorously. I think there could be some value there if it's not enforced rigorously. And of course, maybe there's things we could do. There's probably things we could do as OpenFeature to help with enforcement if an organization decided that they wanted to rigorously enforce the semantic conventions, especially if it had something to do with PII sanitization or something like that. The other thing that I was thinking, somewhat related, is I think that beyond evaluation context, this could also semantic conventions could also be useful for what we've referred to in OpenFeature as flag metadata. I think I mentioned this in the OFEP as well. So data such as like the last time a flag was modified, maybe some identifier for like an owner, be it a team or an individual. I think these could be potentially useful semantics as well. And we might want to actually have different categories of semantic conventions, like semantic conventions for the user, aka the evaluation context, and then for maybe flag metadata or something like that as well. Just two high level thoughts, but I think it's a very compelling idea. Interested to hear what other people think as well.
Yeah, I will grab the mic. Definitely interesting. I think at least just a small note on the flag metadata and what we do see, and our concern is obviously it's very easy to think we should add as much as possible because it's convenient, but we are very concerned with the overhead of doing that, particularly in a production workload. It's usually this information is more usable in a development type of environment, while when you're running in production, maybe some things are useful, but then again, it could be like tagging. You would use that to drive some kind of other behavior in terms of how you report stuff. But we do have a concern in introducing too much into what you actually provide back to the clients and all of that, just because it does have a cost regardless of how you make that information available. But other than that, super interesting. I think obviously the context, but also what we also see is obviously integration with other tools in terms of we call that impression data in Unleash. Other tools call it other things, but kind of I think that is also the other side of it. Is like making information about and standardizing what you share with other tools again in a standardized way. Super interesting.
Yeah, I had a question actually. Something Federico mentioned also, and I'm curious how you think about it, Ivar. You're mentioning like context minimization, which is super fascinating. So at Uber, the flipper system actually encouraged you to put more in the context because you might not know what you're targeting later. Like later without a code change, if you dumped a bunch of stuff in the context, you now have way more flexibility.
Yeah.
For what, and there was a standard thing that was included, right? I think for Gatekeeper in Facebook, it was called user context or something along those lines.
Let me rephrase. So I meant metadata minimization, metadata about the feature flag itself,
I see.
not the context. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think Federico mentioned this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Federico. Were you talking about minimizing evaluation context in the OFEP, or I don't know how you pronounce
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I was referring to evaluation context. I think that some organizations might want to take a different approach, and that's perfectly valid. But what I don't want to encourage is that just because it is in a semantic convention, you should like try to put it like the way you approach OpenTelemetry is that there are semantic conventions for like messaging systems, and it's almost free to just include those, because you don't know if you're gonna find them useful to investigate some production issue. In the case of OpenFeature, you can do that, but you can, and it probably performs best in many cases to just include the minimum data necessary for the kinds of segmentations that you usually do. And if a feature use cases arises that you need more context, then it's very easy to add, because you're thinking towards the future, not towards the past. So you're just one deploy away from adding the required context, and then you can start segmenting on that. There is no avoiding the fact that many popular frameworks are going to have plugins that probably or middlewares that are going to take some of the session or account data, and they're going to include that on as part of like standard, let's say Django OpenFeature package is probably going to include a middleware that puts some of the subject information grabbed from the session data. And for many common use cases, that is going to be very useful for those like writing web applications in Django that want to integrate with OpenFeature and have some like feature toggling a specific functionality for Django. And that plugin will have to choose. Maybe they offer a customization point for that, but they will have to choose how to encode that information. And I would like to be helpful and provide a sort of coordination point where they can say, okay, well, let's just use some of the attributes defined in the official semantic conventions, and then whether you're writing an application on Django or Rails, the most common plugins will usually encode the subject information in that format. So I want to stress that this is a decision that is unavoidable from the point of view of those writing applications. They have to choose on some way to encode the subject information, and it would be better if we can have some coordination. So roughly you can translate and you minimize confusion when you switch between projects and you want to use feature flags.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick and kind of wrap up this section so we can make sure we can hit everything else. But if you have any feedback, definitely look at that issue. I think it's quite an interesting topic, and we can definitely frame it in a way that this is not required. This is recommendations basically. And, as we all know, naming's hard. So even if that's the only value is saying we use email instead of email address or something, like it still, I think, goes a long ways. So take a look at it. And I actually think the use case you're talking about with like middleware and stuff, having some common target is quite compelling too. So maybe that could be something you could add in that issue, because that could actually be a real, win here too. Cool. Yeah, I guess I have the next topic. So I'll very quickly tease it. This has been a really long time coming, but I am almost ready to have a SDK compatibility overview page. It basically pulls from all of the SDK readmes and parses out like the versions and features and all that type of stuff. So I think it's quite cool. So that will make it like a single page where you can see the status and what's missing, drill into what's missing, and hopefully have that correlated to GitHub issues so people can help maybe implement some of the missing features, things like that. I hope to have the PR open today. There's a few just minor usability issues that I'm trying to wrap up now. And yeah, feedback would be very appreciated. I'll put it in the Slack channel once it's ready. But hopefully we can get that out before KubeCon. We can talk through it with some people and maybe even get some additional contributors to help out in certain areas. So Yep, just wanted to quickly tease that. Jonathan, looks like you're next.
Yeah, another quick tease. Our team's working on trying to support all the various open feature languages with providers for KubeCon. So those are all in progress, and hopefully we'll see some. We'll put up some PRs to add docs for that in the coming days.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks. And Stacy, it looks like you're last.
All right. So just a couple of housekeeping items for the community. So our next couple of meetings that are coming up, November 9th is during KubeCon. So I figured we'd probably cancel that one. And then the 23rd of November meeting falls on Thanksgiving here in the US. So do we want to push that one up to the 16th? And I can do that if we're all in agreement that that is good.
Last year we actually did it while we were at KubeCon, so we just found like a space and still joined. I think there's only about like 20% or so of the regular attendees that will be there, give or take. So I'm fine having it still. We can do our best to find a quiet corner, and possibly someone else has to drive the meeting that day. But
sure,
I mean,
so leave it. And then since the 23rd falls, do we want to leave that one as well? The Thanksgiving holiday.
Thanksgiving one. I mean, that one doesn't matter. I probably can't join. I think my family would be upset with me, but we can have Todd join. Actually, I think he takes it off too, doesn't he?
Yeah,
in Canada.
Enough of my family works in the US that I end up taking that holiday too.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, maybe we just float that one out there. I'm fine canceling it or whatever others want to do. So.
Cool. And then just a couple of KubeCon things coming up. So I just linked a couple of the App Developer Con talks that are mentioning OpenFeature. And then the project working session is going to be on Monday, November 6th from 1 to 3 at KubeCon. There's a link there, but there's not a whole lot of information on the room. So we're going to be in room Stutz on level 3, just so everybody knows whoever's attending. And then if you do want to work a shift for the Project Pavilion kiosk that we have for OpenFeature, I linked the sign up sheet there too. So that's all for me. Thanks.
All right. And if you are attending KubeCon, we have a Slack channel. So just feel free to join that. The booth schedule stuff's published, so swing by and say hi or help out there if you're interested. We'll, I'm sure, do some after hours things too. So get in touch with us, and I'd love to meet everyone in person. And on that note, I guess we'll see you guys on Slack or in 2 weeks. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
folks. Cheers all.
Bye.